I used to think silence was survival. If I stayed quiet, if I didn't ask for much, maybe they'd finally see me. But the moment I heard what they said behind that closed door, everything changed. My name, my future, my worth, it was all dismissed in a single sentence. So here's what really happened from the beginning. I froze just outside my father's study, my fingers curling around the edge of the chipped doorframe like it might hold me upright. The voices inside sliced through the quiet like a blade. "We can't fund both," Dad said flatly, as if he were balancing numbers, not talking about his daughters. "Emily takes priority. She's engaged to Senator Cross's son." A pause. Then, "Leona, she's better off managing the cafe. It's where she fits." The cafe. Those 3 words gutted me. I'd poured 22 years into proving I was more than a background character in this family, more than someone who could smile and serve coffee. And yet, here I was, relegated to the sidelines again. I heard Mom's voice, soft and unsure like she was stepping on glass. "But we promised to support them both. Emily has polish, but Leona, she works hard. Maybe she just needs more time." "It's what's best for her," Dad interrupted. "It's realistic." I stepped back from the door like it had burned me. A part of me had always clung to the hope that maybe I was imagining the imbalance, that maybe I was being dramatic. But now the truth sat, raw and undeniable, on my chest. I grabbed my coat from the hook and my car keys from the bowl on the table, hands trembling. If I didn't leave right then, I might explode. "Leona," Mom called as I moved down the hall. "Where are you going?" I turned slightly. Emily was halfway down the staircase, her silky chestnut hair perfect as always, her pearl earrings catching the light. She wore a silk blouse that cost more than my semester's textbooks. "Mom's cooking dinner," she said with a gentle smile. "You staying?" "Dinner." Another show where I'd sit quietly while they praised Emily's internship at the Capitol, and subtly hinted that I hadn't quite found my lane. I almost laughed. "I'm not feeling great," I muttered, yanking open the front door. "Just need some air." Emily stepped forward, eyebrows knitting together in faux concern. "Wait, what's going on? You're acting off." "Everything's perfect," I said with a smile made of steel. "Just like you. Just like this family." "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice thin. "Think about it," I replied and stepped outside. Behind me, Dad's voice cracked through the air. "Leona, get back here. Now." I turned to face him, the man I once believed would go to the ends of the earth for me. Behind him, Mom and Emily hovered, their faces painted with anxiety. "Why?" I asked, my voice cutting. "So you can tell me again how I belong in a cafe while Emily waltzes into a law firm?" "You were eavesdropping," he growled. I nodded. "Yes. And I'm glad I finally heard the truth." "Leona, please," Mom whispered, reaching for me. "Let's sit down. We're a family." I scoffed. "A family? You mean the one where Emily gets the future, and I get leftovers?" Their silence said everything. Emily's voice quivered. "Leona, it's not what you think." I turned to her, anger simmering just beneath the surface. "Isn't it? What do you call it when you get private school, study abroad in Paris, and violin lessons with a symphony tutor, while I've been scrubbing tables since 16 to pay my own way through community college? Silence. The kind that makes you feel the draft creeping through the walls. The kind that wraps around you like loneliness." Dad inhaled sharply, his tone clipped. "If you had applied yourself like Emily." "No," I snapped, my voice sharp enough to slice through stone. "Don't you dare." I did apply myself. I've had straight A's since high school. I worked double shifts, gave up weekends, stayed up all night writing essays while you praised Emily for memorizing case law over wine in the kitchen. Mom couldn't meet my eyes. Her face blurred behind tears she hadn't earned. Emily looked away, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, the sparkle in her bracelet catching the light just like always, effortless beauty. Dad stood tall, arms folded, his jaw tight with disappointment that had become his default expression whenever he looked at me. "You need to cool off," he muttered. "Go for a drive. Come back when you're ready to act like part of this family." I stared at him, something breaking clean inside me. "I won't be coming back," I said calmly. I turned the knob and stepped out into the night, letting the door click closed behind me with a finality that echoed louder than a slam. Rain misted on the windshield as I pulled away. My tears mixed with the fog outside, streaking across the glass. I didn't even plug in directions. My hand steered instinctively toward the only place that had ever felt like safety. 30 minutes later, I pulled up in front of Aunt Celia's house. Her old Victorian sat on a hill just outside Seabridge, its once bright paint now faded by ocean salt and wind. The porch light flickered like a heartbeat in the dark. I sat for a moment, breathing hard, before dragging myself up the steps and knocking. She opened the door almost immediately, as if she'd sensed me coming. Her gray-streaked curls were pinned up, and she wore an oversized cardigan dotted with flour. The smell of warm cinnamon drifted out behind her. "Leona," she said softly, reaching out. "Oh, sweetheart." That was all it took. I fell into her arms like I was 10 again, crying into her shoulder. She didn't press, didn't ask why. She just guided me inside, brewed chamomile tea, and wrapped me in the patchwork quilt that used to cover the daybed in her sunroom. We sat on the couch, yellow lamplight flickering against framed photos of family trips no one ever invited me on. I told her everything: Dad's words, the years of being second best, the quiet cruelty of always being told to settle for less. She listened with a stillness that made me feel heard in a way I never had before. When I finished, she stood and crossed the room to her desk. From the bottom drawer, she pulled out a thick manila envelope. Her voice cracked as she handed it to me. "I was saving this for when you got your degree," she said. "But I think tonight, you need to know you're not forgotten." Inside, I found papers and an old bank book. The balance read, $126,400. My breath caught. "Aunt Celia, what is this?" "Your parents had an education fund for Emily," she said. "So I made one for you. Bit by bit. I always knew they wouldn't see you. But I did." I held the book against my chest, trembling. Gratitude and grief crashed through me like a tide. She saw me. She always had. And now so would the world. "But why me?" I asked, my voice catching mid-breath. Aunt Celia didn't hesitate. "Because I saw what they didn't want to see." Her eyes, firm and clear, locked on mine. "I saw you curled up on that back porch with textbooks lit by a flickering bulb, while Emily practiced violin in a sunlit room. I saw you miss birthday parties to pick up extra cafe shifts, while your parents hosted summer luncheons in the garden. Leona, you've always deserved more." Something inside me cracked, but not in the way I'd feared. For once, my tears weren't just pain. They were something softer. Something almost warm. Hope. I reached for her, holding tight. Aunt Celia was the only constant in a life that had always felt conditional. "I believe in you," she whispered, stroking my hair like she used to when I scraped my knees as a kid. "And now, you finally have the means to believe in yourself." I clutched the bankbook to my chest like it was oxygen. I had spent so long thinking I was only ever meant for the background, that I was someone who had to accept whatever little was left over. But not anymore. That night, tucked into the same guest bed I used to nap in during childhood visits, I opened my laptop. I didn't hesitate. I searched for business programs. Not in theory. Not someday. Now. I reviewed application forms, looked up requirements, compared programs, and bookmarked every school that offered entrepreneurship tracks. With Aunt Celia's fund, I could choose something bold. Something mine. By sunrise, I had a plan. 3 months later, I stood in front of Seabridge College of Business, clutching a new student ID card that read Leona Gray in sharp black lettering. It didn't matter that my hands were trembling slightly. It didn't matter that I was wearing clearance rack shoes while others carried designer totes. I was here. On my own terms. And no one else could take that from me. The pace was brutal at first. Case studies, late-night presentations, team projects with strangers who came from privilege. But every time I felt overwhelmed, I thought of that cold dining room at home, where I used to sit invisible beside Emily's spotlight. I thought of how hard I had worked just to be almost included. And that pain? It became fuel. I declared a major in business development and entrepreneurial leadership. Every class opened my world. For the first time, I wasn't surviving, I was rising. Then, one night as I worked on a digital marketing project in the campus library, my phone buzzed. Then again. And again. A flurry of texts from numbers I hadn't seen in years. "Leona, have you seen this? Emily's all over the news." My pulse quickened. I tapped the link. There it was, Emily's fiancé, Jonathan Blake, being led out of Blake & Rowe Capital in handcuffs. The headline screamed across the top. "Major fraud uncovered. Dozens affected in $20 million investment scandal. My stomach dropped. Emily's perfect world, gone in an instant. For a second, I just stared. Part of me felt a cold shock. Another part whispered, and now the golden pedestal finally cracked. Dozens of families left with nothing. I leaned back in my seat, the glow of my laptop reflecting off the polished library table. My pulse raced in my ears. Jonathan, the golden boy my parents insisted I learn from, the blueprint of success they compared me to my entire life, was now nothing but a polished fraud in a $1,000 suit. And the article didn't stop at him. It listed junior employees also under investigation. One name was buried halfway through the article. Emily Hastings. I stared at it, numb. For years, they paraded Emily like she was a symbol of grace and promise. She was the story at every family gathering. I was the supporting act they barely mentioned. And now? That perfect story was unraveling thread by thread. I set my phone down and exhaled slowly. A strange mix of emotions churned in my chest. Vindication. Sadness. Anger. No matter what she had or hadn't done, Emily was still my sister. My phone buzzed again. A new message. Mom, Leona, come home. Now. We need to talk. Family emergency. Of course. I was only summoned when it was time to clean up the mess. I closed my laptop with a deliberate calm and packed my things. But this time I didn't hurry. I didn't feel the usual panic or desperate urge to fix things. This wasn't the old Leona who twisted herself for scraps of love and approval. This was Leona Gray, second-year business student, scholarship recipient, and woman in control of her own life. I wasn't walking into a crisis. I was walking in on my own terms. As I drove through the early evening haze, headlights dancing across puddles on the coast road, I felt an odd detachment. The world I'd once longed to belong to, the manicured lawns, the pristine reputations, the forced smiles, it felt foreign now. False. I turned onto the winding hill that led to Aunt Celia's home, that quiet sanctuary above the sea. She had left the porch light on, like always. Like she knew I'd be coming. I stepped inside, ready to explain everything. But before I could even set down my bag, the doorbell rang again. Aunt Celia moved to answer it. Her face tightened the moment she saw who stood there. My mother. She looked like a storm had ripped through her. Her coat hung crooked off one shoulder, and her eyes, usually sharp with control, were rimmed red and swollen. Her hair was a mess, her lips trembling. Leona, she gasped, rushing inside. You have to help us. Please. I didn't move. Help you how? It's Emily, she whispered, voice cracking. She's under investigation. They think she might have known what Jonathan was doing, that she helped him cover things up. The air left my lungs. I had expected it, but hearing the words aloud made my stomach twist. Mom kept going, desperate now. The lawyer says we need to pay restitution or she could face formal charges. We don't have enough. We'd have to sell the house. Even your grandfather's cabin on the lake. I sank into the armchair. The places where Emily and I had played as kids, now up for negotiation, traded to buy her a second chance. And once again they had come to me. And what exactly do you expect me to do? I asked, my voice low and dry. Mom's grip tightened around my hand like she was trying to anchor herself with it. Leona, could you help us? With the money Celia gave you. I let out a soft, bitter laugh. Of course. Now they remembered the account Aunt Celia had quietly built for me, the one they never once acknowledged. The one they assumed I'd never need because in their eyes I was never meant to have a future beyond pouring coffee and picking up after Emily's glittering trail. That money, I said slowly, is for my future. Not to patch up the wreckage of decisions I was never part of. Mom's face paled like I'd slapped her. Leona, please, she's your sister. I looked away, clenching my fists under the kitchen table. My throat burned, but I kept my voice level. And for years I was just the backup plan. The fallback girl. I'm not giving up the one thing that finally gives me a chance to build something real. She stared at me, eyes brimming, mouth trembling, but said nothing more. Then she turned and walked out, leaving the door ajar behind her. The cold night air slipped into the room like a ghost. In the days that followed, the story exploded. Emily was formally suspended from the firm she had once name-dropped at every family function. Her flawless public image crumbled. The girl who used to be the center of every social gathering was now on the front pages as a possible accomplice in multi-million-dollar fraud. Her once perfect outfits looked wilted under the flashing cameras. Gone were the curated smiles. All that remained was scandal. The fallout spread like wildfire. My parents listed the house within days. The summer property where we used to pick wild berries and splash in the lake was mortgaged almost immediately. And then the messages came. Texts, emails, even voicemails from distant cousins who had ignored me for years. Every single one said the same thing: come home. The family needs you. But I didn't answer any of them. Because I knew what would happen if I did. I'd be pulled back into the role I had always played. The fixer, the afterthought, the invisible glue that held together a picture-perfect lie. I had promised myself I would never be that girl again. One night, while studying on Aunt Celia's balcony, the sea breeze brushing over my open accounting book, a text flashed across my phone. Unknown number. Leona. I need you. It's Emily. I stared at the message for a long time. Part of me wanted to delete it. But another part, the part that still remembered how we used to build sandcastles and share secrets before everything changed, ached. Emily Hastings, the girl who once had it all, was unraveling. And somehow I had become her last lifeline. I looked up at the starlit sky, my chest tight. Was this forgiveness? Or was it a test of everything I'd rebuilt? After a pause, I typed 2 words. Where at? 30 minutes later, I parked outside a sleepy cafe just beyond Seabridge. Rain tapped gently against the windshield. The golden lights inside glowed against the misty night, and I could see her, curled into a corner booth, smaller than I remembered. Inside, Emily sat tucked into a corner booth beneath the soft yellow glow of a flickering wall sconce. She looked nothing like the polished version of herself that used to grace magazine-style family portraits and black tie fundraisers. Her coat was frayed at the sleeves, her hair clinging in damp strands to her pale cheeks. Her eyes, once piercing and bright, were rimmed with red, hollowed by exhaustion and shame. I slid into the seat across from her without speaking. She looked up slowly, her voice barely a whisper. You came. I said nothing. Just crossed my arms and waited. Emily clutched the coffee in front of her like it was the only thing holding her together. Her hands trembled as she brought it to her lips. She didn't drink. I know what he did, she started, her voice cracking. I know it was wrong. But I didn't realize how deep it went. I studied her. This wasn't about Jonathan anymore. This was about choices. About silence. About complicity. I started noticing weird entries last year, she continued. Transfers that didn't make sense. Reports that didn't match. When I asked, Jonathan told me it was normal. That it was advanced strategy, stuff everyone in finance did. I felt my stomach turn. And you just believed him? I needed to, she admitted. Her voice was so small. If I pushed too hard, I'd lose my job. My future. I thought, if I just kept quiet, it would pass. The truth stung more than any lie. For years, she'd been the chosen one. The one with all the backing, all the praise. And to protect that position, she'd looked away. So now what? I asked, voice low and sharp. She reached into her bag and slid a folded document across the table. I opened it. A formal agreement from the district attorney's office. If I testify against Jonathan, she said, barely able to finish the sentence, they'll drop the charges. I won't serve time. Just fines and a probation deal. I scanned the paper. It was a lifeline. But only if she was willing to sever the tie to the man she'd once built her world around. But Mom and Dad, she said, her voice breaking. They want me to keep quiet. They're scared it'll ruin the family name. I let out a bitter laugh. The kind that carries years of betrayal and quiet neglect. Of course they are. Their image matters more than your freedom. Emily looked down. Her hand shook as she clutched the edge of the table. You're the only person I can ask. I don't know what to do. I'm lost, Leona. I need you. I wrapped my fingers around the warm ceramic mug in front of me. For so long I'd lived in her shadow. And now somehow I was her last source of light. You should sign it, I said slowly. Not for them. Not even for me. Do it because you still have a sliver of integrity left. She nodded, tears falling silently onto the paper. Will you come with me? She asked, her voice unsteady. I stared at her for a long moment. Then finally I reached for my coat. Tomorrow. 9 a.m. district office. Don't be late. I rose from my seat and reached for my coat. Tomorrow morning. 9 o'clock. District office. Emily nodded, gripping the agreement like it was the only thing anchoring her. I turned to leave but paused at the door. My voice came out low, measured, final. Don't expect me to carry this for you, Emily. This is your mess. Your choice. The next morning, I stood in front of the Seabridge district office. Early autumn air clung to my coat like chilled breath, the sky gray and motionless. Emily was already on the granite steps, shifting anxiously from foot to foot, clutching her folder so tight the corners had crumpled. She looked up as I approached, her face pale and drawn. Her hair was pulled back in a messy knot, the kind that spoke of a sleepless night. I gave a curt nod but kept my distance. I wasn't here for comfort. I was here to witness truth. A staff member in a navy blazer opened the door and motioned us inside. We were led down a quiet hallway into a nondescript room. Four walls, a table, and a voice recorder blinking softly in the center. The blinds were shut. The silence was thick. A woman entered moments later, stern and composed, carrying a legal pad. The prosecutor. She sat across from Emily, her voice cool but direct. "Are you absolutely sure you're ready to make a full disclosure?" Emily looked over at me, but I didn't flinch. This wasn't my burden. It never had been. She drew a breath and looked the woman in the eye. "Yes," she whispered. Then louder, "I'm ready to tell the truth." The next 3 hours were a long unraveling of everything she'd once clung to. Emily admitted she'd noticed financial inconsistencies as far back as 8 months ago. Wire transfers with no paper trail. Internal memos that were mysteriously deleted. She said Jonathan always had an answer, always wrapped his lies in charm and authority. And she had chosen to believe him. Because the truth threatened to shatter the illusion of perfection she had spent her entire adult life curating. She described how he asked her to keep quiet, how he joked that everyone cooks the books a little, how he'd insisted no one would ever find out. I listened silent and still. But inside, every confession rang like a bell in a hollow chamber, echoing off memories I couldn't forget. How many times had I been told to be more like Emily? And here she was, unraveling years of deception. When it was over, the prosecutor reviewed the document, then signed the non-prosecution agreement. In exchange for her full testimony, Emily would avoid jail time. She'd pay a fine, serve probation, and become the primary witness in the case against Jonathan Blake. Outside on the courthouse steps, Emily looked weathered, like someone who had walked through fire barefoot. She turned to me, voice fragile. "Thank you," she said. "I couldn't have done it alone." I looked at her evenly. "You didn't do it for me, Emily. You did it for the truth. And don't forget, you owe that to everyone your silence hurt." She nodded, eyes brimming with something like understanding. The headlines hit the same afternoon. Fiancé turned state's witness in Blake capital fraud scandal. Seabridge hadn't seen a fall from grace this spectacular in decades. No one called her the golden girl of Seabridge anymore. Emily Hastings, once the face of polished success, featured in charity spotlights and investment panels, was now the cautionary tale of a high-profile fall. The day after her testimony, her firm sent an official termination notice. No ceremony, no farewell email. Just silence. The event invite stopped. Her name was quietly removed from the alumni board at her private university. The social circles she once ruled erased her without a trace. She didn't just lose her job. She lost her standing, her identity, and the gilded pedestal our parents had built for her since childhood. But rather than face their role in it, my family chose a familiar path. They blamed Emily. From what I heard through strained whispers and secondhand messages, my parents said she had dragged the family name through the mud. They refused to acknowledge their years of looking the other way, of encouraging silence to protect reputation. Meanwhile, Jonathan Blake, the architect of the whole scheme, was allegedly negotiating a plea deal behind closed doors. I didn't bother keeping up with the details. That world? It wasn't mine anymore. That evening, under the soft light of Aunt Celia's living room lamp, I reviewed my scholarship renewal paperwork. I was prepping my transfer to the regional university's business school. Tuition-free, thanks to a full academic award. As I filled out the final section, something inside me felt lighter. Like shame, obligation, and invisible chains had finally been lifted from my shoulders. I hadn't come here to fix anyone's life. I'd come to fix my own. A week after Emily signed the deal, my phone buzzed with a familiar number. "Dad." I hesitated. The screen lit up with his name again. Finally I answered. "Leona," he said quickly, voice tense. "The family needs to talk. Please come home." I stayed silent a moment. "Just say what you need to say. I'm in the middle of something." He paused, clearly thrown off by my firm tone. It's about Emily, he finally admitted. She's having trouble finding work. No one wants to touch her resume now. And your mother and I were hoping. Maybe you could help. I blinked, stunned at the audacity. Help how? You've got a solid connection with Mr. Baynard at the restaurant group, he said quickly. You're interning there, right? Maybe you could put in a word? She's good with people. She could help with admin or marketing. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so predictable. I see. I'm useful now, I said evenly. Funny how I didn't matter when I needed help. Leona, he said sharply. That was years ago. Exactly, I replied. Years ago, I asked for help with tuition and got a lecture about responsibility. Now you want me to risk everything I've built to clean up Emily's reputation. The family needs you, he insisted. Emily needs you. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. No, I said. What she needs is accountability. What I need is peace. I'm not sacrificing my integrity for anyone. Especially not for the people who only remembered me when their favorite daughter lost everything. There was silence. Then a whisper, Mom's voice in the background, shaking. Maybe crying. Years ago that might have broken me. But not anymore. I'm sorry, I said, my voice calm. I'm not recommending her. Not to anyone. And I ended the call. You'll regret this, Dad snapped. Like it or not, Leona, family is everything. You don't get to replace that. I let out a short, hollow laugh. If I really meant something to you, you wouldn't have treated me like a backup plan. Not over and over again. And with that, I ended the call, my hand trembling as I set the phone down. Outside, the late autumn sun painted amber streaks across the sidewalk, brilliant but biting. It was the kind of light that looked warm but reminded you winter was coming. That evening, my phone buzzed with message after message from my mother. First came the pleading, then the guilt, and finally the accusations. How could you turn your back on your sister? After everything we've done for you? I read each one calmly, then deleted them. That girl I used to be, the one who lingered in doorways desperate for approval, was gone. I had drawn my line and I wasn't moving it again. The very next morning, an email from Baynard Hospitality lit up my screen. The subject line made my breath hitch. Employment offer. Regional management position. I clicked it open, scanning the details twice just to be sure I wasn't dreaming. The salary was triple what I earned as an intern. A permanent role. Real responsibility. Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes, not from sadness, but from release. All the weight I had carried for years, the self-doubt, the shame, it loosened its grip. Across the room, a mirror reflected back a face I almost didn't recognize. My own. But stronger. Grounded. Proud. 3 days later, just after finishing a team meeting, I returned to my desk to find a thick envelope with a silver seal resting atop my keyboard. The return address, Celia Donovan, attorney at law. Aunt Celia's personal legal counsel. I opened it with a sense of unease. Inside was a bundle of papers and a handwritten letter in Aunt Celia's looping script. My dearest Leona, if you're reading this, then it's time you knew everything. I didn't just set aside savings for you. I also spent years quietly gathering proof. I saw what your parents were doing. I couldn't stop it, but I could make sure you'd have something they could never steal: freedom and truth. My hands shook as I flipped through the enclosed documents. Bank statements. Wire transfers. Tax filings. Contracts with forged signatures. Layer after layer revealed one thing. My father had used both Emily's name and mine to launder money through shell businesses. Aunt Celia's fund wasn't just a gift. It was an escape hatch she'd been building behind the scenes. That night, I called Emily. When she arrived at Aunt Celia's, she looked like she was bracing for another betrayal. Instead, I slid the folder across the table. They didn't just manipulate you, I said, my voice steady. They used me too. She scanned the pages in silence. Her expression shifted from disbelief to fury. They did this to both of us, she whispered. I nodded. And now we get to decide what happens next. When Emily and I stepped into the glass-walled conference room on the top floor of the Donovan and Blake building, our parents were already waiting. My father sat stiffly at the head of the table with their longtime attorney to his right. My mother's expression was tight, her lips pressed so firmly together they were nearly white. Dad's face darkened the moment he saw us enter together. Without a word, I set the manila folder down on the polished oak table and slid it across to him. We're here to talk, I said. Dad opened it and scanned the first few pages. The shift was immediate. His usual mask of confidence faltered, his fingers trembling just slightly as he turned the next sheet. Mom leaned over, reading quickly. Her hands clutched the edge of the folder. Where did this come from? She asked, voice cracking. That's not the question you should be asking, I said, my voice cool. What you should be asking is whether you prefer to explain this to federal investigators or to us. The room fell into a heavy silence. Even their lawyer, usually composed to the point of smugness, went rigid. He said nothing, but I could see it in his eyes. He knew exactly what those documents meant. You've got two choices, I continued. We go public and you both face a full federal audit and likely criminal charges. Or, I paused, sliding a second set of papers across the table, you sign over full ownership of Donovan and Blake to Emily and me. Step down permanently. Effective immediately. Dad slammed his palm against the table. This is blackmail. No, Emily said, her voice steady, stronger than I'd ever heard it. This is justice. And long overdue. Mom began to cry, her shoulders trembling. But I didn't flinch. Not this time. With no other way out and the walls closing in, they signed. Dad's signature looked like it had been dragged from him. Mom could barely grip the pen. When it was over, I gathered the papers and walked out with Emily at my side. Neither of us looked back. Before we continue, if this story is striking a chord with you, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. There's so much more ahead and you won't want to miss what happens next. When Emily and I stepped into the glass-walled conference room on the top floor of the Donovan and Blake building, our parents were already waiting. My father sat stiffly at the head of the table with their longtime attorney to his right. My mother's expression was tight, her lips pressed so firmly together they were nearly white. Dad's face darkened the moment he saw us enter together. Without a word, I set the manila folder down on the polished oak table and slid it across to him. We're here to talk, I said. Dad opened it and scanned the first few pages. The shift was immediate. His usual mask of confidence faltered, his fingers trembling just slightly as he turned the next sheet. Mom leaned over, reading quickly. Her hands clutched the edge of the folder. Where did this come from? She asked, voice cracking. That's not the question you should be asking, I said, my voice cool. What you should be asking is whether you prefer to explain this to federal investigators or to us. The room fell into a heavy silence. Even their lawyer, usually composed to the point of smugness, went rigid. He said nothing, but I could see it in his eyes. He knew exactly what those documents meant. You've got two choices, I continued. We go public and you both face a full federal audit and likely criminal charges. Or, I paused, sliding a second set of papers across the table, you sign over full ownership of Donovan and Blake to Emily and me. Step down permanently. Effective immediately. Dad slammed his palm against the table. This is blackmail. No, Emily said, her voice steady, stronger than I'd ever heard it. This is justice. And long overdue. Mom began to cry, her shoulders trembling. But I didn't flinch. Not this time. With no other way out and the walls closing in, they signed. Dad's signature looked like it had been dragged from him. Mom could barely grip the pen. When it was over, I gathered the papers and walked out with Emily at my side. Neither of us looked back. 3 months later, the nameplate outside the downtown office read Gray and Hastings Collective, a new name, built on new values. On our first morning as co-directors, I stood in the hallway with Emily, both of us dressed simply, ready to begin again. We purged every executive who had turned a blind eye to the schemes our parents orchestrated. I began building what I'd always dreamed of, a hospitality division focused on local, sustainable spaces. With backing from Baynard Group, I launched Harbolite, a community-centered restaurant brand fusing good food with purpose. Emily restructured the legal and compliance side of the company from the ground up. We didn't just rebuild what they had ruined. We built something better. Emily handled the legal end, contracts, compliance, expansion filings. Her precision was unmatched, and the more she worked, the more I saw someone I barely recognized in the best way. Not the carefully curated version of her shaped by our parents' ambitions, but a woman determined to build something real. We didn't just repair what had been broken. We built an entirely new foundation. 6 months after we took control of Donovan and Blake, the company had grown beyond anything we imagined. We now owned 8 restaurants under the Harbolite brand, 3 environmentally focused investment funds, and had just launched a FinX startup that had already drawn a $12 million valuation. That afternoon, as the ink dried on our franchise deal for the newest Harbolite location in Portland, I found myself alone by the panoramic window of our headquarters. Below, Seabridge gleamed in the golden haze of dusk. I thought about the basement room I used to study in, about folding aprons at dawn, about smiling behind bakery counters while Emily jetted off to networking galas. I wasn't surviving anymore. I had arrived. Emily appeared beside me, gently tapping on the glass to pull me from my thoughts. "Leona," she said, her voice softer now, free of the brittle defensiveness it once carried. "The investors from New York are downstairs. They're ready to talk expansion strategy for next quarter." I met her eyes. For the first time, her smile wasn't polished or practiced. It was genuine. Earned. I smiled back. "Let them wait 10 minutes," I said. "We celebrate first." She laughed and sat down in the chair across from me. I opened the small cabinet behind my desk and pulled out a bottle of champagne I'd been saving for a day like this. I poured 2 glasses, our fingers brushing for a moment as we toasted. "To everything we lost," I said, raising my glass. "And everything we're going to build," Emily added, her voice steady. The crystal clinked delicate, full of promise. We weren't just rewriting our lives. We were writing our legacy. Later that evening, after the meetings, Emily and I drove through our old neighborhood. The street lamps cast long shadows and the houses looked smaller than I remembered. We stopped in front of the corner bakery, once my cage, now transformed. A new sign hung above the door in warm copper script. "Celia's Kitchen." A quiet, perfect tribute to the woman who saved me. I stepped out of the car and approached the window. Inside, families laughed. College students hunched over laptops. The scent of cinnamon and warm bread drifted through the night air. This place had once symbolized the limits others placed on me. Now it stood for everything I had claimed for myself. Emily joined me on the sidewalk, her arms folded against the crisp night. "Do you think Aunt Celia would be proud of us?" she asked. I didn't answer right away. I just let the moment settle. The traffic hum. The laughter inside. The scent of pastry and the memory of lavender from Aunt Celia's living room. "She always believed we could," I said finally. "Even when we didn't." We stood there quietly, the wind brushing our hair, the past gently letting go. That night marked the first time in my life I felt complete. Not because we'd won or taken control or proven anything, but because I no longer needed to. Leona Gray, once the overlooked daughter expected to serve, to stay small, had risen. Not just as co-founder of a thriving enterprise, but as a woman who knew her worth, who reclaimed her voice, who chose to break the cycle, not just escape it. And Emily, once the golden girl used as a shield, had stepped out of the illusion and into her own truth. We weren't sisters in rivalry anymore. We were partners in healing. We didn't need revenge. We had something better. Freedom. Purpose. And a future we built with our own hands. What do you think about Leona and Emily's powerful transformation? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you love stories of growth, healing, and reclaiming your power, don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow us for more. Your story might be next.